This is Jason Jeffries, and welcome to the Alliance Project. So what we're going to be talking about tonight is some ET history and some fun stuff. I want to clear up some stuff that that people went over and kind of correlate some information that I have through the reading I've done and some other means of information I went through. Essentially, we're going to be talking about the ET history and the Orion Wars, what we call them the Orion Wars, like Star Wars, where a lot of people got their inspiration for writing their books, stories, and anything about the Annunaki. So essentially, the humanoids went down, the Annunaki went down two paths. One path was normal and natural, and they were still human form, and the other was like a hybrid machine, DNA, cyborg mixture, and a lot of them were female and essentially highly telepathic and had a hive mind. So when you have a hive mind, it eliminates compassion. They essentially know compassion's created from not having a hive mind. It's the separation of consciousness that creates compassion. If we knew what everybody was thinking, we wouldn't need compassion because we would have absolute feeling and knowledge of what they're feeling. So the humans that attained their ability to essentially penetrate light speed with their aura and their soul, that's what a lot of the Egyptians were talking about with the Jed pillar and the ways of the Jedi and projecting their plasma fields and their aura. It's a lot what they're talking about there. They're talking DNA has been measured interactions within DNA that are actually beyond light speed, faster than light. So that's what's going on here. They essentially kept their skill, so they could use their focus essentially in meditative states to ignite their glands, and therefore igniting their DNA into an implosive point. And this is called like a phase conjugative state. It's when the self-feeding tornado I was telling you about with physics. All physics has to do is with the tornado. The low pressure point ends up feeding the high pressure point with an outside wrapping and then feeding it back down. The cool air goes down through, comes up to the bank. It's weather, and you guys can look at that. That's essentially all physics is. This, when you create that within you, essentially, you can create a coherent aura and then bend your plasma, project your plasma field, and essentially create gravity and throw gravity around. That was the whole idea of plasma projection and things like that. But when you're moving faster than light, then you're no longer constrained by time, as things normal people are. That's essentially the quarantine we're at, this time quarantine. We can't really time travel in this aura. After you basically succeeded the breaking the mortal shell and the limitation of the light speed with your DNA being implosive and creating a coherent aura through phase conjugation, as I said, and this has a lot to do with human bliss and happiness, and that's why meditation and mental hygiene and body hygiene and food hygiene is very important for this. That's why religion was created. It actually came from all this. We'll get into that more. This actually would probably be a 2-3-part show because I really have to clear up a lot of misconceptions and misunderstandings that people have. Essentially, their own biological magnetic field let them create wormholes. And that's what I was talking about with DMT and the pineal gland. It actually creates a wormhole behind your eyes. Blam, right there. That's how people get the ability to see beyond the event horizon. Intuition. This only happens if your human antenna is working properly and you're fed properly and your hygiene, your aura doesn't have holes in it. And my dogs are really acting up tonight, so I apologize. When you really think about how important bliss is to igniting your DNA and making it self-implosive. You can see why teenagers take the risks they do to be happy and get the rush they do, because they'd rather die than not be. It's literally a survival instinct. It's trying to ignite that DNA and ignite that soul and live, essentially, and become what they're reincarnating for, to achieve the goal. This is all a little bit of background so you can more understand Enki, Enlil, Mardu, Anu, the whole parallel that people get confused with, right? So I'm kind of giving you a little background right here. But essentially, you needed to understand that they had the ability to steer a magnetic vector from a circle, which is essentially what you call matter, into a line, which is what we call energy. Okay? So they were able to do this with their mind and essentially steer themselves through time. It's rather simple if you think about it. If you take and you pump something in like a circle. So you take something, you pump it in a high pressure vacuum, like a fire hose essentially, and you create a slip knot through it at the right angle, and then it creates lift. It could even lift the hose or possibly even the fire truck. So when that happens, that's exactly what you're having. You're actually creating lift. So the Nazis discovered this. They did it with mercury, pumped them into one into the outer ring, one into the inner ring. They had them cross spinning and essentially created lift, and that's what was called the Nazi lift. So actually they're creating a time bubble as well. It's actually a very simple concept once you understand solar physics and a little bit of just normal physics, and how you don't get any preconceptions. You don't be like an Einstein or dedicate yourself to one thought path, like quantum mechanics or physics or electric universe. You kind of borrow ideas from all, and then you have a greater understanding, and you can put yourself up to what this is. Essentially, Enki learned from his mother how to tie this slip knot, and because of this, he could literally ensoul DNA. And that's what they were talking about, bringing back cadavers from the dead. They had DNA, and they understood how to ignite that DNA, so they could actually bring a body back from the dead, the Lazarus effect, however you call it. But that's a completely different story. But this is where the word fire, igniting the fire of life, fire, P-H, P-Y, however you want to look at it, but that's where the word came from. Essentially, it's you think of a tornado that feeds itself. It has, or lightning, when you study the sun in your heart and plasma physics and solar physics and just how your heart interacts, you realize that there's like 7 spins outside, 5 spins inside, and it's like a tornado essentially that feeds itself. And when it does this, it creates self-organizing phase conjugative plasma bars, or donuts, if you will, your chakras essentially, and you become coherent. And there's a lot. It's magic, okay, essentially to a lot of people because they can't understand. But I'm trying to break it down for you, my understanding. But their father Anu, he was obviously he was half machine. He was still he didn't have the ability. And what they meant by the Nephilim DNA was the fallen DNA, the inability to do this. Okay? So that's what they meant by that. So I'm trying to clear up as much as I can. I know there's a lot going on in my mind, so please just bear with me a little bit. Essentially, DNA is basically a biological magnetic compressor. It makes a wave conjugative state where you can, what I'm saying is you reflect a wave back symmetrically, essentially creating a Merkaba. And your aura, it's like a generator, if you will. But these things it remembers, there's information in all of that because it has to do with frequency and vibration. And for matter and things to become stable, they have to come inside like the the sacred states, you know, the sacred geometry, saucahedrons, dodecahedrons, things like that. So that's when they're stable. Okay, so that's what they were talking about with the lowest sacred geometry, 5, 5, 5, 6, 6, 6, 7, 7, 7. The word dodecahedron, if uttered outside of, you know, the wrong places back in the day, and I believe Roman culture, they would kill you. And then it was that secret of knowledge. But essentially, we're trying to create your DNA, and your body is going through an evolutionary stage where it's trying to create a plasma being that can essentially steer its own sun around and be coherent. Essentially not need a body and become light, a light body. It's a really beautiful thing when you think about it, because then you could inhabit a vehicle, or you could not. You could astral project, it'd be like dreaming, if you will, but very much more vivid. But the Hebrew and the Enochian letters, they had a lot to do with this. It actually was a depiction in the Sumerian. They were actually depicting like a picture, either a topographic or a side view picture of the plasma field created and generated that you would fill up essentially in the liquid crystal of your brain, if you will, if you essentially just fill up your perception with that shape, concentrate on it, say the vibration, and it would in tune you with a certain outcome, if you will. And that's what it was coming around. It was vibrating, and you know, that's why YHVH, and they're talking about Yahweh, Vahe, they're trying to get you to direct energy towards a certain entity, if you will. We'll get into that later if you guys like. But this is what the way of the Jed Cherokee talk about it, igniting a fire in the mind. There's many, many cultures that talk about it. It's essentially atomic physics too when you think about atoms. But what was going on is the same thing is happening in the human heart that happens in the heart of the sun, essentially. So what they did was, you know, there's messages that are like sonically recorded in basically what you'd call the piezoelectric braid of DNA. And when you have a passionate or blissful experience, that is really key to getting the right coherence and wavelength and frequency to make a coherent aura, essentially a force ghost, if you will, or a protective aura where you could be immortalized, essentially, or have your memories after death. You gotta go back to the beginning of the story, and you picture Enki learning how to create life from his mother. I mean, one of the Draco, Annunaki, like I said, they were highly psychic, had hive mind. They even, throughout history, if you remember, they had queens, princes, and princesses, and different women married into key points of history, royal history. That was actually because they had a hive mind, and they could essentially feed information back to the whole, the hive. So it was brilliant when you really think about it. He's learning how to create life from his mother, and it's essentially when you take lightning and you have that spiral of lightning and that tornado bends, essentially, it starts feeding itself, and you get the ball lightning effect. Right there when that whip cracks, that's essential for the implosion, DNA, life, and everything in general. Okay? And this is what it still blows scientists today, but it almost actually looks like the symbol for Taurus, or what would you say, a vortex, or a ram's horn. There's all kinds of very neat symbology that looks like this. And you're looking essentially top down at it. It's a Taurus donut. Ball lightning. Scientists lifetimes, and they still can't figure it out. But people believe they can steer ball lightning with their minds and things like that. Essentially, I mean, there's a lot to talk about there. But when you use basically learning how to create life, okay, and when people talk about quantum wave function or quantum mechanics, it's, to simplify it, they say basically no wave can stand at all unless it divides into links evenly into a rotational circumference or a circle. Okay? But they leave out the point that there has to be something creating that bend, that curve, that perfect curve in the first place, from a line to a ball, making it coherent. Okay? That gyro, that spin, that recursion essentially that's where gravity comes from. That's gravity itself. Essentially that is the gyre, the GR. That's where the word essentially came from, the gyro, the vacuum, the spiral, the vortex. Okay? The pooling, there's, they leave that out, it has to be divided, but this gravity is there for it to be divided. That's actually created as a side effect of phase conjugation, which is when a waveform, like I said, reciprocates out and does the same thing at the opposite. So like a yin yang or anything like that. But that's the problem, is you get a confusion. There's a difference between awareness and gravity because both are self-organizing, and both happen at the same time through the same processes of perfect embedding and implosive compression, essentially. But they knit waves together and make, the golden mean ratio, the phi, I guess, or however you want to look at it, Fibonacci spiral. Essentially, the same thing. This process is faster than the speed of light. That's the idea. It's the same thing as the sucking in the drain hole of the tornado, or the inertia leaking out and feeding itself at the top. It's the only way to make the vacuum coherent, is to actually make it stable like that, is to feed it like that, to phase conjugation, to be phase conjugate, essentially, to fork out and reciprocate and be self-feeding tornado, essentially, self-feeding aura, not need a body. Get your life and your DNA to that point where it's implosive and you essentially don't need a body. That's where it goes back to where I was telling you, Luke Skywalker was Enki, and he wakes up to find out that his father is Darth Vader, which, Enlil becomes, half cyborg machine, but that was like the tale of two brothers, They really didn't take like the whole. They twisted around. It was when you think about Dune and the characters in there, it's the same thing. They were really throughout cultures. It's popped up. Right, like that's where people get the Christianity. They think Jesus and this and that was a real person and this and that. Like essentially, if you look back, there was a Muslim scholar named Ahmed Osman, and he showed the true Egyptian roots of Christianity were basically deliberately covered up, and they burned the books at the Library of Alexandria. And we've found them through archaeological digs, but he also shows that the Holy Trinity were derived from the Egyptian models of Osiris, Isis, and Horus. Okay? and how Horus's virgin birth gave rise to Jesus' virgin birth, and how Akhenaten became the model for Moses, and how Tutankhamun became the model for Jesus. And the early Christians devised the fictional life of Jesus, but basically out of Egyptian sources for their own political purposes. Amen is derived from the sun god, Amun-Ra. The Lord's Prayer, like essentially, you're praying every time you say Amen at the end of the prayer. You're worshiping an Egyptian sun god, Marduk. It's not a good thing. It's another point is we want to make is how the Orion war cultures attached to Rigel and Sirius, essentially. Because these people were dominating different parts of the galaxy, this evil empire, right? And Anu and Enki and Enlil, they left. They were being chased. I've went into that before. They rebelled for a good reason. Okay, they didn't want to beat the Borg. Okay. Now, after that, Enlil, Zeus, Yahweh, he became a corrupt person. Okay, fear gripped him. But Enki threw him essentially a wild card, and we'll get into that later. It was basically a conflict over, can we steer DNA and have it steer itself through, an intelligent wormhole, basically, or do we want to do it have machine cyborgs? Okay. That's why it's creepy when you think about Stephen Hawking's thinking we must genetically engineer and creepy things like that. Bill Gates, all the stuff that the really rich people, brilliant people do and want to do. But when you think about Thoth claiming he was from Rigel and essentially saying he had blue blood, he was telling the truth when you think about it, because Anu, his dad, was rooted from Sirius, and Enki, his mother, was rooted from Rigel. So they were, Enlil had the half brother, which that's the idea. Enlil came from Sirius as well, with her Rigel, Orion. The whole idea is the mother was different. Okay? She was this forward mind, however you want to look at it. The difference in the blood essentially was just blue blood was rich in copper, hold the oxygen, and if you only used the iron, the red blood, hold oxygen, it presented less possibility for genetic rate implosion. It wasn't as conductive of material, and that's where we get into the monotone code and other things. Enki's mom, she didn't have fallen DNA. Okay. She still had implosive DNA and knew the secret. That was the idea. And she taught this to her son. Now, supposedly when they rebelled, they went on this artificial planet, Nibiru, their Death Star, essentially, and they headed for Earth. And, they had their Enki, Enlil, and then Herzog, they had their genetic engineering skills, but they needed gold. Okay, they did need gold. So essentially, there was two factions: one that was backing this expedition, one that was chasing them, didn't want it, and they were rebelling. That comes in later, and I don't want to get too caught up because I'm gonna actually have to cut this video short here and make a part 2. So as I said, Enki's mom's Draco, dragon blood. Her lineage didn't lose the skill to, steer their DNA wormholes essentially with their glands, and most of them did. A majority of the Draco dragon line did lose that, and that's why we call them Nephilim. That's where a lot of that came from. And there's when you translate genesis, to its original meaning, it really means the origins of the Adamic race. So basically, the Nibiru, it meant like literally the wedding of two families. So that's what they were talking about, the marriage of these two families. The families didn't always agree. You had the serpent and the snake family. You had the Orphanic or the Seraphanic, the Luciferic or the Abrahamic. It was always this way. They didn't always agree. Ibi and Uru, that's the two tribes, the bird and the dragon tribe. It's where it actually comes from. If you look back in history, you see Ibi and Uru in all kinds of words, and it's always really important words too. Okay, so it's something to think about. But essentially, one thought we should steal it through, cyborg morphing, and they miscalculated and fallen DNA, and the other ones just did it the right way, and blam, no problems there. Like I said, when you have increased telepathy, you essentially get a fiercely survivalistic hive intelligence that just lacks compassion, because the compassion is from the agony of separation of consciousness from other people, not knowing what they feel, how we feel, how they feel, how we feel towards them, everything. The lack of connection, that's what creates that. Essentially the Nibiru's, Orion Empire's genetic experiments, they were later called Adam and Eve, and there was a lot of rules about it. And this one couldn't mate with that one, or these ones couldn't mate with that. Essentially, there was rules that where you could put, the Annunaki could put their seed, and who could receive the seed, who could give the egg, essentially. Enki didn't listen to the rule. He put his sperm in an Annunaki egg, he put his sperm in a human egg inside of an Anunnaki surrogate, broke the rules, and then created a Lulu, something that could produce its own offspring. Okay, and I think that leaves a perfect time to pick up again. But that was actually the first time that we could procreate without cloning. So it was essentially like Superman, the first natural birth in forever. And actually, when you think about Superman, in the real story of Superman, I think Stanley was a huge insider. They essentially were seeding their race amongst the stars. One wanted to do it natural. The other ones thought that they needed to do it with machines, genetically, and they realized that they had the war, they destroyed their own planet, lack resources, sent the only natural birth in thousands of years out to homeworld Earth, which the sun was more intense than it was on their world, which you drank the radiation, but the Earth's oxygen levels and climate was much less fierce than at home. You didn't have the elements like kryptonite that would degrade his cells, so essentially they became godlike when he was here. And that's what they were talking about. And he was really, when he's seen X-ray vision, and he was freaking out because he was seeing through kids' bones and seeing what was in people's pockets and stuff through the walls and things like that. If we could see every spectrum, UV, radio, gamma, X-ray, instead of just visible light, it would take extreme concentration. It would almost be painful because there's so much to deal with, so much stimulation. And I believe that's what autism and autistic people go through. I believe they have an overload of their senses because they're picking up on their antenna, essentially is picking up on so much more, maybe because of the mercury from the shot, different things like that. It's messing with their antenna and their ability to pick up on consciousness, essentially, and steer their consciousness and get to a coherent state. So it's very overwhelming for these people. I think it's something that people need to think about. But I'm glad I could upload this video tonight. Hope you guys all enjoy, and stay tuned. We'll do part 2.